Alrighty, I know that it's a little bit late, about 2 months after the match at this point, something like that, but I figured better late than never, and I've gotten several requests to go ahead and review Eddie Hall versus Brian Shaw. Now, there's something about watching two people arm wrestle that kind of don't know what they're doing exactly, that's both way more exciting and way more terrifying than normal, so going into this match, I was super, super excited. And if I remember correctly, I believe that Eddie Hall only had like 2 or 3 weeks or something like this to prepare. Maybe it was 2 or 3 months. I might be misrepresenting that number. I think that Brian had significantly longer to prepare. And of course, Brian Shaw's coach, or essentially coaches, were Devin and Auden Larrett. And Eddie Hall's coach was Neil Pickup. And you can really see that reflected in the way that they arm wrestle. One thing about Eddie in general, he seems to be more of an all-around athlete to me than Brian Shaw does. I feel like Eddie is the kind of guy that picks up stuff really, really quickly, is a lot more natural with it. Brian's the kind of guy that really has to sort of robotically go through everything, do a ton of reps, and then eventually it'll become a little bit more fluent for him. But he's probably always going to struggle a little bit more in learning something quickly, and I think that we saw that in this match too. Now, the first round, pretty much just all nerves. And we're going to see Brian, I believe, we do get a start here. Brian is going to go right off the back of the pad. And if I remember correctly, that's going to be a foul out and a win for Eddie Hall. So right off the bat, Eddie's doing great. But of course, we haven't really seen anything yet. Now, what's going to happen in this match eventually is we're going to see some straps. Now, I think maybe Brian gets a pin here. Oh, excuse me. That was the second foul. Sorry, so that was the first foul on the elbow from Brian. This was the second foul that resulted in Eddie Hall getting a pin. We're going to look at the second rounds here. So just nerves from Brian, kind of whatever. This doesn't really tell us anything yet. We're going to move along here. And this time, we're going to see a really nice kind of somewhere in between high hook and top roll from Brian. Now, right off the go, we do see Brian holding on. And you can see Eddie with the higher knuckles doing a great job setting up here, forcing his knuckles to be high. And Eddie is going to, right off the go, he's going to fire back. And you can see that Brian does actually kind of contain Eddie's top roll first. Then he kind of looks at him, or kind of makes that sort of pause right there. Then he starts to go up and over the top. So that was awesome from Brian Shaw. That was great. I don't really have any complaints there. Potentially he could have slipped up over the top of Eddie's thumb a little bit to get a little bit more leverage, but sometimes you know that you have it and you want to just clamp down on that position and go ahead and secure the pin. So awesome win here from Brian. So now we got one foul on Eddie Hall in that round, looking great for Brian. And on the restart, we're going to see pretty much the exact same thing. Eddie Hall is going to fire into the fingertips of Brian Shaw. But once again, pretty much the exact same lane. And this is a trend that you're going to see throughout this match. Eddie's biggest mistake, of course, that everyone was aware of is just not slipping. And notice this regrip that Eddie does. Something really important about regripping is regripping only works for the person who is not holding on. If you are holding on to your opponent and you try to regrip, it'll just make it even worse. You should not regrip unless you have first gained height or gained some sort of position in which when slippage occurs, it's going to benefit you. That's when you can go ahead and just let go of your opponent. But if you're in a position like Eddie is, where if both guys kind of slip and slide across the other person's hand, you can just see Brian is going to gain height and Eddie's just going to go underneath Brian's arm. So Eddie does not want to regrip here. He just wants to slip out. But unfortunately, he tries that regrip, kind of just makes it even worse. And then he's going to get pinned here. So that's the first pin for Brian Shaw. Looks great from Brian. And at this point, it's like, okay, this match is probably over. But we still haven't seen straps. And sometimes that can be the factor in the match that really changes everything. And as we saw with this match, that was the case. So at some point, they're going to slip or something. We're finally going to get to see straps. This match took forever to set up. Now this time, much better go from Eddie Hall. And he does a much better job of gaining height. You can see his knuckle height right off the bat. Now from here, if I were Eddie, I would just go ahead and go right over the top. No need to hold on to Brian there. And it makes me a little bit nervous because you can see the tides sort of start to turn here a little bit. And there's moments where it's difficult to tell, is Brian holding on to Eddie or is Eddie holding on to Brian? There are moments where Eddie could have gotten in trouble, but he actually does a pretty good job here, doing some regrips that actually help him. You can see him sliding his elbow forward as he does this regrip to gain height. That was pretty good. And now the knuckles are pretty even. If anything, it's in favor of Eddie Hall. He's getting really close to a pin there. Really close to a pin. Should have slipped, in my opinion. When it's even close, if there's any doubt in your mind, you should just go ahead and slip. Eddie was making me nervous there, but he does end up holding him off for a little bit, but he does get pinned eventually. Should have slipped right here. Should have slipped right here. Should have slipped pretty much, probably just right off the bat. I think he just should have slipped right over the top of him. And it's interesting in this match because I don't know, maybe Neil is kind of coaching Eddie, but he's also having to MC this event. So perhaps that's kind of what's going on, is Eddie doesn't actually have anyone telling him to slip in his corner. Because I think if he just slipped in this match, as we will see once we get to the strap rounds, Eddie probably would have defeated Brian Shaw here. That's my take on it. So finally, 2-1 Brian Shaw. I believe we're going to get to see a slip eventually. Again, good start from Eddie outside of straps. Eddie does look a little bit more natural. Brian looking more robotic. Eddie looking more fluent and athletic. Finally, we get to see in straps. And this is where everything changes. Because now Eddie does not have to hold on with his fingertips anymore. If his wrist goes back, the strap will just hold on for him. He's going to have instantaneous connection to his lat drag, to his pec muscles, to his shoulder, like everything that's super strong, that he has built over years and years that isn't as arm wrestling specific, just in the hand and fingertips. He's going to have not total access, but significantly more access to all those major muscle groups instantly. And you can just see it. As soon as they do this grip here, as soon as they close the hands, Eddie once again is going to fire. That is another thing I noticed Eddie doing well in this match, is his explosive power was significantly better than Brian Shaw's. I don't think that Brian was attempting to be explosive, so it's not like a mistake was made, but Eddie did go ahead and decide to be the guy who's going to initiate. And right off the go, we're going to see Eddie have that instant access to all those muscles. And this time it's totally different. Instead of these guys just kind of fighting with each other's fingertips, it kind of being this awkward match where no real pressure is there, and it's just who's going to end up clamping down on the other guy's fingertips. Now there's some real connection to raw power here. And Eddie honestly has a pretty nice looking Todd roll here. You can see his wrist is back, but it doesn't throw him off. He continues to pull this direction. He continues to apply back pressure through his thumb and through his high knuckle position, even when his wrist is back, and he still continues to apply side pressure. You see his elbow, Eddie's elbow drags to the back of the pad. He knows his wrist is going to go back, or maybe he didn't know his wrist is going to go back, but he just made the correct move. But it looks like he knew it was going to go back and knew what he was doing. And you can see that Brian's elbow flexor angle opens. And now Brian is pretty close to the pad. He's on his bicep. Eddie is opening his Brian's elbow flexor angle with his lat drag and with his side pressure. And it's just going to take a second here. Eddie with a good regrip there, really fast, shoves his elbow to the front. And at this point, I think this is an okay regrip because Eddie's knuckle is significantly higher and he can actually get away with this. He goes forward, gets a regrip. Maybe that did a little bit there. It's hard to tell. I think he did increase his height. Yeah, it looks like he did increase his height. And from here, Eddie has access to that pressure. And you can see it looks like that was relatively comfortable for Eddie. It doesn't look like there was a lot that Brian was going to do there, because as soon as you get into straps, it's a lot more about the arm power. Once again, a lot less about the hand power. But as we know, unfortunately for Eddie Hall and Eddie Hall fans around the world, Eddie just doesn't slip after this. He never slips again. We never see the straps again. Moving into this next round, we're going to see him continue to do these kind of regrips and just really, really hold on with his fingertips. Everything that Devin Larratt would say to never, ever do. And honestly, it kind of showcases, like, look at this position. This is horrible. So, of course, if you're in this position, you slip. Every arm wrestler knows you're out of there. Probably even before that. You would never hold on from right here. But Eddie decides, I'm going to shove my elbow toward Brian and do a regrip. Still a horrible position, but honestly, the fact that he even holds Brian off for a second here is very impressive. It shows how strong Eddie is. But of course, the leverage disadvantage from here is just insurmountable. Brian, honestly, Eddie held him off for a little longer than I would expect. This is a horrible position. Should have slipped, but it's okay. Now he knows, and you would think, okay, maybe he'll make this adjustment afterward. But unfortunately, for the rest of the rounds, he doesn't end up making that adjustment. Or I guess he only has one round left after this. If Eddie had just slipped and gone to straps, I think maybe it could have been different. Like right here, we see him constantly doing this regrip right there. So it's like the position from here, you can see Eddie is sliding underneath Brian's arm. Now, if Eddie was in straps, this would be okay because you can't just slide underneath your opponent's arm in straps because you're connected. So instead of sliding underneath, you can see Eddie's fingers peeling open right there. Eddie's strap would be holding on for him instead of his fingertips, and he would open Brian Shaw's elbow flexor angle just like in the last round or in the strap rounds. That would still be a great position. He would be doing a Todd roll, and likely he would be fine from there. But since he's outside of straps, he just needs to slip because his connection is broken. But unfortunately, he keeps trying to do this regrip, and he's just gifting Brian access to everything that he wants. And eventually, Brian is just going to go ahead and pin him from this terrible, terrible position that Eddie has right here. So overall, and this is going to result with Brian getting the victory 4-2. So overall, I was super, super impressed by certain aspects of Eddie Hall's game. It's funny because the things that are probably more difficult to learn in the sport, Eddie did very well at. I think his Todd roll honestly looked really good. A broke back wrist top roll while maintaining knuckle height is something that is really difficult for a lot of people to learn, even seasoned arm wrestlers. He did that very, very well. But what Eddie couldn't do, one of the easier things in the strap, is to simply let go and just allow the match to slip and go to straps. And he didn't end up doing that. So it was kind of funny. He did the hard things. He did those really well. And then the easiest thing, he just didn't quite manage to do that. So let me know what you guys thought about this match. I think if every single round started in straps, probably Eddie would have won this match. But Brian did everything perfect considering what Eddie gifted to him. So super impressed by both Brian and Eddie. I think both these guys could do a lot in the sport in the future if they want to. And hopefully we'll get to see a rematch between these guys at some point, or maybe even a match between Eddie and Thor Bjornsson or Brian and Thor, something like that. Get a few more strongmen to come over to arm wrestling. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you later.